Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pocket Coach. Let me start my 5-minute timer and let's get into our experiment for today. So, our experiment today is long form versus short form story writing. Okay, so here's the idea. What the heck am I talking about? So many teams are taught that classic format for story writing, and then they just don't do it. If you look at their stories by audit, you'll see tons of them don't have anything in them, or they have like something other than the normal expected format. So the hypothesis here is that there's actually a short form syntax also used by Mike Cohn in his books. In fact, he's used both types in his book, so he endorsed both at least through publication. He might even have invented them. So anyway, if we try this experiment with short form, we believe you'll decrease the time to write your stories and that you'll increase quality of stories because they'll actually be well written. They'll actually follow the syntax. And to get the skill growth on this one, you've actually written the short form stories and your team actually thinks they're better. Okay, so my shirt today, Ion Storm. Now let's get into the experiment. So question is there a better way to write stories? Okay. Experiment is short form versus long form. This is a real experiment we ran. We used 8 teams to validate, our hypotheses. And so the question was, which is the better format? The current industry standard is as a role, I want to goal so that I can reason, where reason is like the business goal. Example, as a book buyer, I want to buy a book so that I can read it. The previous standard, which was also used by Mike Cohn in his books, was a user can goal. Example, a user can buy a book. So we have, as a book buyer, I want to buy a book so that I can read it, or a user can buy a book. And the question is one of these better than the other? The second question is, should you allow both of these in your org? Should you only allow one of the two? And finally, we ran the experiment across 8 teams, and here's our results. Okay, so first we did use Equip to bound our experiment. I have other videos on Equip. So in this case, engagement, quality, productivity, and predictability for the experiment. For engagement, the question what we used was, well, which would be easier to master of the two types? Which would they like better of the two types, engagement, right? And which will actually be used day to day versus skipped, again, engagement in that technique. Quality, okay, which one's better quality wise? Which one would be easier to understand? Which one has the right amount of information and which has the information critical for, say, development tests and user guides? Productivity, for productivity factor, we said, okay, in 1 hour, how many could you write of each type? And which would be faster to consume? Both of those would be productivity thinking. And finally, predictability is at the end of a release, if we said we're going to do 10 stories, did we actually finish all 10 stories? So is there an impact on one way or the other from the two ways? So those were all of the different factors we came up with using the Equip model. The ones in red, easy to master, will they like better, easier to understand, and faster to consume was the subject of our first experiment. And all we did was take 5 stories and write them both ways to see which people liked better. Okay, so if you look here, for me, the top is way easier to consume. Like I can read those 5 very quickly and understand what they are. I find them also easier to understand versus what's down below because there's so much text to get through. I definitely like the top one better. And for me, it's certainly easier to master that top one because there's less to master, right? We'll talk about more mastery in the next experiment. So if you look here, a user can withdraw money is the short form. They can track transactions, enroll in a course, search for items, and get a shipping manifest. So all very easy to consume. Down here, same story. As a customer, I want to withdraw money so that I can spend it. So I can withdraw money, right? That's this part that's the same on both, but I get these so that I can spend it and I get the customer, a customer, right? The next one, I can track transaction. This one is as a branch manager, I want to track transactions in my branch so I can identify customers to upsell. So those are 2 different examples. In terms of master, like, understand, and consume, you can be the judge yourself. So that was experiment 1. For us, across the 8 teams, the top form won for these 4 factors pretty heavily. Okay, for our next experiment, we want to dig into quality. So quality is a big deal here. And so we focused on the last 2 parts of quality, which is which type includes the right information and is all the information critical to development, test, and user guides, et cetera. So we started digging into that. We had 2 parts of this experiment. First, we looked at the part where it says as a user, as a role versus a user can, right? So the question was, does having that role name add clarity to the story, right? So some stories, it turned out, worked for many different roles, and we found people arguing as to which of the roles they should put on the story name, and it was a lot of time. And I don't know that there was a lot of value in it because we use different formats to figure out, say, security, login, authentication kind of stuff. So I don't know how much value we got from arguing what the role name should be. I'm going to reset my 5-minute timer and start again. So this will be my second 5. None of our videos go over 15 minutes, so hopefully this one won't change. So too often teams spend way too much time on, trying to find that right name. A user can works no matter what. And so it speeds your writing time significantly. And if there is a specific role we need to worry about, we should be handling that through non-functional requirements around usability or around security, et cetera. So a role name should not be used to enforce permissions. So as an example, we had a user can track transactions, right? If it said, as a bank manager, I want to track transactions, that doesn't mean we need to enforce that. Otherwise, every single story would have to be that way, and they're not, right? Only some stories. So better to use acceptance criteria. Here, a user can track transactions, test that only a branch manager can track bank transactions. So if you really want that to be built into the code, you need to put it in as acceptance criteria. Do not rely on the fact that the role name is in the story name, because all stories have names, and most of them aren't asking you to reinforce it through automation, through security, right? So that'd be a problem. So with this technique, it's clear that you should enforce it. You can also use non-functional requirements. And so the system shall enforce access according to the access by role rules. That'd be a table. Here are the things they can do, can't do, a separate asset altogether. This should not be part of the naming of a story. Okay. If the team feels like including a road name is better, go for it. If they're like, can we put, track star? Yeah, put track star. It's fine. But don't be spending time arguing about the role. Just say, guys, just put a user can, let's move on. We'll figure out permissions and stuff in a different requirement. If the team is spinning on role names, ask them to use user. Your team will still build a great system either way, right? So either way, they're going to build a great system. So go for the fast way. Allowing flexibility here will speed up your story writing without compromising your quality. Go for it. Find out. Run your own experiment and see. The second part of this test was the second half, where it says, so that I can reason, in the current classic form, right? The current form, I guess. Does the reason add clarity to the story? So let's look at the reasons from that first slide we looked at, right? Is it important to include business context on every story? So every story has so that I can. That's the business context for that story. Is it a good idea to put that on every story? The DoD told us to do the opposite. Back when I used to develop software for the DoD, they said remove all business information and use instead the words the system shall. They call these declarative requirements. The system shall was required for all requirements so that we focused only on what the system does and eliminated confusing business context from the requirements. Business context is critical, just not in every single requirement. And that's what's happening with these so that I can. Okay. So if we look here, as a branch manager, I want to track transactions at my branch so that I can identify customers to upsell, right? So now the developer can become confused. Am I automating track transactions, or am I automating identify customers to upsell, right? Probably they just want us to track transactions, since this isn't the so that I can, but it's confusing. If we need software to upsell customers, we should have different stories that describe a user can upsell a customer and what that all looks like, right? And then if not, if we're not needing to upsell customers in software, then you're overcomplicating the requirement. So that's not helping, right? Is recording business value important? 100% yes. We need to understand that the goal of these bunch of stories is to upsell customers, but it's a bunch of stories, okay? So at the story level, it's too detailed. Some people use features or Jira epics or safe features as a higher level. Yes, put it there. Now all the stories share that purpose, right? And so that's going to speed everything way, way up. Now, is it harmful to omit the reason? Remember that stories are just bookmarks for later conversation. They're not requirements or bookmarks to have a talk. So I need to have a talk about tracking transactions. What kind of stuff do you want to track? What do you want me to omit? What's an example, right? There's a conversation we have to have. So you have to have a conversation no matter what. Adding this so that I can is not going to help you most of the time. So you have to have the conversation. So why make them slower to write, slower to read, if we're going to have a conversation either way? So that's the second part. So based on that, we decided that, again, the short form was the winner. And so that only left 3 items here, which will be actually used day to day versus skipped. In 1 hour, how many can we write? And what type would lead to higher say-do ratios? So we decided at this point we had enough evidence it's a good idea to do it. And so we ran the experiment for 1 quarter across 8 teams. And in the end, also answered these 3 questions. And that's my second time box. Okay, final time box. And I will be able to get it done because we're getting pretty close to the end here. So we ran it for a quarter across 8 teams. And after running the experiment, here's what we found. Which will be used day to day versus skipped. We've pulled random teams that were not using this format, and we looked at the 8 teams who were, and 100% of the stories all had a user can appropriately written sentence for every single story. But when we looked at teams that did not follow this format, it was in the range of 0% to 35%. Like that was the range that we saw. Now some had 80%, but they were outliers, right? In the bulk, in the majority, 30% were about the amount that we expected to see well-formed, written with as a role, I want a goal so I can reason. Productivity. In 1 hour, we watched teams doing this that were using long form, and they were arguing about the reason, they were arguing about the right role to use. And they actually were only getting through 1 to 5 stories in an hour. We saw that pretty commonly. When we focused on a user can blank, they were banging out 10 to 20 stories an hour, the 8 teams that use this format. They couldn't believe how much easier, how much more fun it was for them. Try it yourself. Try using it both ways and see how many stories you crank out in an hour. Finally, predictability. Did one of these techniques lead to a higher say-do ratio at release time? And there was no correlation. The 8 teams had the same range of say-do ratios, which were in the 80 to 90%, as the sampling of teams we looked at that were using long form. So team maturity was a much bigger factor when it came to say-do ratio over the way they wrote the stories. So bottom line then, so we decided it should be a good idea, but the teams were like, okay, but will it cause confusion if we allow both ways, right? So that was one of the questions from the beginning. So they were like, we don't want to cause confusions. Our teams are already using the long form. Our training has the long form. The majority of the industry is using the long form. These were all pushbacks on the change. Even though we had all this data that showed it was a good idea, the org was resisting because it was different. It was change and it was going to cause inconsistency, right? So you're going to run into this as well. If this technique is measurably better, then that's not the way we're currently doing it, is not a valid reason. So our teams are using the long form, invalid. We're here to create change, and we have proven with metrics that it's a better way. So fighting it for consistency reasons is everything Agile stands against, right? We've proven our case. Get out of the way, right? Don't hold back because of consistency. Teams using the long form have no difficulty understanding the short form. So people who are really good at long form, when they read the short form, they were like, yes, I understand it. And vice versa. The people who were writing short form could read a long form story just fine. So it didn't cause any confusion that people were writing it two of the acceptable ways. When it came to training, all we had to do is add one bullet, a bullet that said a user can is an acceptable format, and not even train on it. Don't worry. People will do it without any training because it's better. On all the fronts, it's better. So without training, people will gravitate towards it anyway. So train them on the long form and then give them permission to use the short form, and you'll see they end up using the short form. So finally, here's the recommendation from our experiment. Use the short form. It won the experiment. However, there are times where the long form is useful. If the value of a story is not clear, like it's a standalone story that doesn't trace up to a parent, that's a great time to write the long form. It's a standalone story, right? Clear. Anyone on the team asks for it, hey, can you help me understand the value of this story? Immediately write in long form instead. That's going to help you think it through. If a team says, hey, on our team, we like long form, we don't want to be forced to short form, don't force them. Long form is fine, okay? But it needs to be the team, not the scrum master. The scrum master doesn't get to push people around, right? Finally, if you are using a feature to story hierarchy like SAFe does, or an epic story hierarchy like Jira does, then the short form is extra helpful because, as we said before, the feature will be the so that I can, right? So buy a book online maybe is the feature here, or the epic in Jira. So the stories might be a user can browse books. If you wrote the long form, it would be a book buyer can browse books so that they can buy a book online. A user can add a book to their cart. Nope, now it's a book buyer can add a book to their cart so that they can buy a book online. Do you see what's going to happen? Every story is going to have the feature name as their goal. Lots and lots of stories here so that I can buy a book online, so that I can buy a book online. You saw that first page. You saw how much harder it was to read these. And so All you're going to do is slow everybody down. If you were to go here, if you do it this way, you're going to slow everybody down. And it's just going to be the same feature name over and over. Look at your stories today that are following the right format, and you'll be surprised to see how often they all say the same thing for that, so that I can. And that's it. That's our experiment. Use short form. Thanks. My name is Anthony Crane for Pocket Coach. I hope you enjoyed our video. And let's stop recording.